Good afternoon once again, and welcome to the launch of the TEW elections, pre-elections report. I am your moderator for today, Teresa Mutua, and I welcome all of you. What is TEW, you ask? The Tanzania Elections Watch, which is TEW, is a regional initiative whose mandate is to shed light on the electoral context in the Tanzania and offer a regional response to the same. The initiative focuses on growing regional and international attention to the response to the electoral situation in Tanzania. It also seeks to activate the regional and international human rights system and the international community to take necessary action to address risks of crisis emanating from the electoral context. Tanzania Elections Watch serves as an alternative to the now restricted electoral context in which independent democratic actors are no longer able to fulfill their mandate in Tanzania. The TEW initiative has put together a dedicated panel of eminent persons made up of well-reputed individuals from the region to critically debate key developments and events as they unfold in order to trigger appropriate responses to address the prevalent human rights and political concerns being observed in Tanzania. Ladies and gentlemen, we have members of the TEW panel with us today, and they will be explaining to us a bit of what is in the pre-election report before we launch it today. So we welcome you. We are live on the TEW social media platforms. We are live on Twitter at Watch Tanzania. We're also live on Instagram at Watch Tanzania as well. You can check out the website at www.tanzaniaelectionswatch.org. To start us off, sorry, I had something from my laptop, so then we had an echo, forgive me. To start us off, we will have the panelists from the TEW. I am joined in studio by one of them, Mr. Zain Abubakar.
Hello.
Hello, Zain. Joining us also from Uganda is the chair of the TEW, Professor Sempembwa. Hello, Professor.
Hello, greetings to everyone.
And greetings to you too. We are also joined by another panel member, Dr. Matembe, Miriam Matembe. Welcome to the webinar.
Thank you. How are you, ladies and gentlemen?
Thank you, and good to see you, Dr. Matembe. We will also have two discussants to join us for this webinar and give us their expertise on issues Tanzania and issues relating to the thematic areas we're discussing today. Joining us is Commissioner Brian Penduka. Welcome to the webinar, Brian.
Well, thank you very much for having me, Teresa. I look forward to an engaging discussion.
Thank you, Brian. Joining us as well is Mr. Don Dare. Welcome to the webinar, Don.
Thank you very much, Teresa, and good afternoon, everyone from across Africa and the world.
Welcome, Don, and good to see you. Right, ladies and gentlemen, we encourage you to send in your questions and your comments as we go on, because we will have an interactive session at the end, where then we will get to listen to you as you give us your comments and your questions. You can direct your questions to whichever panel, speaker, or discussant, so that then we get to interact with you at that time. We will also have a session where we will allow you to ask your questions directly to the panelists. So please don't go anywhere, join us, and we will have an interactive session. So let us start right away. And we are going to begin with Dr. Matembe, one of the TEW panel members. And She will be discussing issues to do with violence, because then the panel has observed the increased levels of violence happening in Tanzania. And Dr. Matembe will explain to us the violence, the kind of violence that the members of the TEW have observed, and what kind of implications this violence can have as far as a free, fair, and credible election in Tanzania and the life after elections in Tanzania is going to look like. So welcome, Dr. Matembe, you have 10 minutes.
Thank you very much, listeners. I am very happy to be part of this debate as a member of TEW who has been closely observing electoral processes in Tanzania. And I'm happy to present to you what we've been observing in relation to electoral violence. What I want to say that election is supposed to be a process through which people, a peaceful process actually, through which people choose their leaders to govern them. But unfortunately, in Africa, where leadership is now perceived as a means of livelihood and wealth accumulation, elections have become a matter of life and death, characterized by violence, intimidation, harassment, bribe, name it. And unfortunately, of course, Tanzania is not an exception. So I would like to say that electoral violence in Tanzania is not a new phenomenon. It dates back to the multi-party elections of 1995. In the 1995 presidential elections, violence erupted following opposition claims of massive electoral fraud by the CCM, which had been in power in Tanzania since independence. And I want to say that subsequent elections have not been an exception. However, it is important to observe that throughout most of the previous elections, violence in Tanzania has been manifested in post-election framework. However, the trend has changed. And right now, violence is happening prior, during, and after elections. I just want to give examples of this kind of violence. For instance, during our observation, we have noted that Chadema party chairman, Freeman Mbowe, in June, he came under attack as he returned, requiring 2020, Chadema as a firebombed, and Tundu Lissu's vehicle came under attack by what his lawyers described in the letter to the Tanzanian police force as stone-throwing bandits. And we note that Chadema rally in Nyamongo was met by police unleashing tear gas on attendants. So such incidents of violence are now happening right now. And another thing that has characterized electoral process right now in Tanzania is hate speech and hatred. This has become an important feature of the ongoing trends on social media. Part of it is driven by President's own rhetoric, particularly against his critics from the opposition. Media as well as civil society, from opposition, media as well as civil society. In March 2018, Kerry James, the chairman of the ruling CCM, was reported during CCM Youth Wing meeting in Dodoma, aiming at government critics, accusing them of being foreign puppets and was quoted saying, "We can no longer tolerate their continued insults on our country. We have had enough, and be it as it may, we will deal with them, and when we have, we will take care of their wives." And he went on to say, "It is not our job as youth leaders to be civil. We must be prepared to confront them with maximum force. As a young man, you should take pride in causing havoc. Wisdom can wait till you are old." Such kind of speech and talk is really dangerous because it provokes hatred, which comes out into violence. More recently, security agencies are increasingly fingered in election-related incidents of violence, intimidation, and threatening. In the 2010 elections, for example, the chief of staff for the TPDF threatened potential large-scale violence after the 2010 general elections and urged political parties to accept the results of the elections. Now, when we look at the current situation, politically motivated disappearances have taken center stage. Circumstances under which investigative journalist Azore Gwanda disappeared mysteriously in 2017 and later discovered dead in 2019 have until now not been conclusively investigated. And right now, as we observed, we've seen there is a lot of direct threats and assaults to media house and individual journalists. The examples which I can give: media relations with Magufuli administration have been torrid. In January 2017, at a public rally while inaugurating factory in Shinyanga, northwestern Tanzania, the president claimed that the days are numbered of two newspapers that, in his opinion, are publishing seditious news. He warned that two newspapers always carry negative reports and that he pledged not to allow the media to undermine the nation's peace. In March 2017, the head of state, during the swearing in of newly appointed information minister, he said, "I would like to tell media owners, be careful, watch it. If you think you have that kind of freedom, it is not to that extent." He also instructed Dr. Mwakachembe to clamp down on media organizations that publish or broadcast material deemed to incite unrest, saying his government would not allow few individuals to destabilize Tanzania. Now, as we continue to watch, we see rights groups, human rights groups are concerned that newly introduced regulations are extremely high-handed, that online content procedures and social media users can be held liable for materials deemed indecent, obscene, hate speech, extreme violence, and the like. The new regulations, as we see them, are likely, they have created apprehension and are likely to breed a situation of violence before elections are completed. In November 2018, the EU recalled its ambassador to Tanzania over what is said were the deteriorating human rights and the rule of law in the country. Tanzania's record has deteriorated amid shrinking civic space and violation of human rights. Increasing concern remain with regard to Tanzania's crackdown on lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender, and the failure to handle the matter diplomatically. The election has also seen the rise of violent extremism in the towns of Nkuranga, Kibiti, and refugee in coast region, and the government's heavy-handed approach to dealing with it. From January 2015, reports involving the killings of police officers, local government officials, TCM, local leaders, as well as civilians started to appear. Some associate this spate of violence with unorthodox Islamic theological doctrines, while other analysts have associated the incident with the people's claimed hatred of police. Following the incidents, Tanzanian security services led the counter-terrorism response, mainly through the increased presence in affected areas and broad exercise of police power. Analysts think that the police's heavy-handed approach in the coast region may have helped deter further attacks in the region, but the Tanzanian government failed to adopt a whole of government approach to address the underlying dynamics of such attacks. Social media has become an important battleground for the increasingly polarized political war. Twitter, for instance, has gradually become the center of impassioned debate on a wide range of political themes. During the election, social media has offered a fertile ground for violent discourse where veiled and viral threats are issued, and occasionally violence is not only tolerated but encouraged. Online violence and abuse has been aimed at women, particularly some of the leading social media activists like Fatuma Karume and Maria Serunji, exposing them to gross abuse, intimidation, and bullying. In Zanzibar, on the other hand, politicians have often featured charged radicalized theoretics. Some CCM leaders have pushed the narrative that they are a revolutionary party that captured power by force and will not willingly cede it in an election. They have regularly branded the opposition as a proxy of the former colonizer. The opposition, on the other hand, have laid blame on the ruling party for playing the radical card to detract Zanzibaris from its incompetence and failure to deliver on the promises. The present political intolerance can be traced back to the first hotly disputed election, 1995. It is highly suspected that the prevailing narrative is bound to accentuate polarization and trigger another wave of violent post-election period if dialogue is not quickly embraced. It is also worth noting that the continued defranchisement of young people in the islands has contributed to radicalization and the emergence of violent gangs, most popular of which is Ubaya group. Last year, for instance, a woman of about 40 years of age was recorded in Chonga, Pemba Island, accusing the government of semi-autonomous Zanzibar of having established a discriminatory employment system. Such sentiments have bred a sense of frustration, discomfort, and radicalization that is partly responsible for political tension prior to the election, which would certainly promote violence. Recent incidences involving police banning demonstrations on the grounds that the demonstrations carry high likelihood of turning violent has further inflamed the political situation in Tanzania. In latest cases, it has had to take the intervention of the UN. With barely a week to elections, an independent survey shows that nearly a quarter of Tanzanian women are somewhat or very fearful of political intimidation or violence. Past experiences of the dominating narrative of violence in the upcoming election has shaped this view. Given the extent preceding the 2020 elections, the political climate, the role of various actors, and the legal framework governing elections in Tanzania, it is very difficult to guarantee that the 2020 election will be free and fair. In Zanzibar, in particular, where a pre-existing electoral dispute is yet to be resolved, it is of concern that the lack of opportunity for judicial remedy of electoral disputes may further aggravate the risk of violence.
Thank you, Dr. Matembe. And it's
of widespread violence, it is important to support efforts towards activating a violence warning and response system for Tanzania in the context of both dialogue and judicial remedy. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you, Dr. Matembe. And it's quite interesting that you finalize with your comment on women, because then in this past week, we've seen at least two cases. We've seen in the past, even before this last week, we've seen politicians in campaigns insinuating things against women, women MPs who are campaigning for these elections. And this past week, we saw on YouTube at least two cases of women members of parliament being stripped by police, being beaten senselessly. And I think this goes into the comment that you were saying on women feeling insecure and fearing violence, which is quite sad for a democratic republic such as Tanzania. Which is a good place to bring in our next speaker, seated next to me, Mr. Zain Abubakar. Zain, you have a background in understanding issues of civic space, freedom of information, freedom of expression, and you have sat in this panel and you've observed the shrinking civic space in Tanzania. Kindly illuminate to us on behalf of the panel what kind of civic space we see shrinking, in what ways is it shrinking, and what are the ways in which Tanzanians can begin to expand this space.
Thank you very much, Teresa. Good afternoon to all participants. I'll try to be short because Dr. Matembe has laid a broad context of what's going on in Tanzania, not just from a violence analysis perspective, but from shrinking democratic and civic space. But let me start with a point, an important point which she made, which is that elections are a process. And in order to determine the credibility of any elections, you have to follow the whole process and the electoral cycle. So let's start with the last general elections. There were a lot of challenges that were faced by Tanzanians in the last general elections. And many of the observer missions then made a lot of proposals on how to improve the credibility of future elections. And to give you an example is that in the Zanzibar elections, the electoral chairman, the chairman of the Zanzibar Electoral Commission, claimed to have cancelled the elections without any backing of the constitution or the legal framework in Zanzibar. Now, the expectations of many well-meaning Africans and people in Tanzania and the world was that then the Tanzanian administration would take up the recommendations and seek to put in place changes that will make these particular elections more participatory, more free, more credible. But the observations that we have made, including concerns raised by many Tanzanian stakeholders, is that immediately after the last elections in 2015, the government actually, instead of embracing those proposals actually went into reverse. And the first casualty in terms of democratic and civic space was the suspension of all political work by political parties by the president. So since 2016, the political parties that, other than the ruling party, have had problems of even holding meetings. And that order for suspension or banning of political activities or political meetings by political parties was only lifted a few months ago. So that in itself, in the concerns that have been raised, is that it has impacted negatively to the political actors other than the government ruling party and the president from engaging meaningfully with citizens. Secondly, there has been the transformation of the legal and administrative regime that has impinged many of the civil liberties that are practiced in a democratic country or system. And many of these have then impacted negatively on the citizens and the ability of citizens to participate meaningfully in the electoral process. So let me give you a few examples. There has been tightening of laws that manages the establishment of civic organizations, including non-governmental organizations, both in terms of registration and their operations, including using of other laws that do not directly speak to civic space, and using those laws to criminalize citizen independent actions, including the use, or some people may argue, the misuse of the anti-money laundering laws, so that organizations will then be charged with money laundering. The misuse of the taxation laws, misuse of media laws, misuse of laws pertaining to the right to assembly, the right to impact information, to access information, and also the right to peacefully assemble. So much so that many of the actors who are outside the state and outside the ruling party find it very difficult to hold free public meetings. And it is, we have done an analysis, and you will see it in the preliminary report, in the report, that the pre-election report that we're launching today. When you get to read it, you see specific instances where citizens can no longer access information freely and without consequence, including something as simple as live broadcast of social media activities. So political parties that who do not have access to state resources and want to use technology to broadcast their meetings are required to give notice 2 weeks ahead of time. And you are then also censored in terms of what you can do and what you can say. So in a nutshell, there are 5 little things that I want to people to take away from this report. The first one is that so far there's an uneven competition ground in Tanzania. It's not a free process, and that those who are not members of the ruling party have had problems in their nomination process. They have had many of their candidates disqualified without due process, and they have had many of their candidates impinged for those who have been nominated to carry out their campaigns without interference. Secondly, we are very concerned that the media situation in Tanzania is such that the media is not able to freely broadcast and independently broadcast. and there has been consequences, including suspension of licenses, suspensions of the right to broadcast for at least 2 weeks, and so on. And we are concerned that many Tanzanians have shown concern that there may be even attempts in the lead up to the voting day and possibly the counting of votes, that there'll be a total blackout in Tanzania and that there may not be access to information. And we are advising the Tanzanian authorities not to do that, because in the absence of credible, reliable information, people will then act on rumors and unreliable information. So this is an action that might enhance the possibilities of tensions and possibility of violence. Thirdly, we have noticed that a number of the presidential candidates, and specifically the opposition presidential candidate of Chadema in the union elections, that they were suspended from campaigning, and the Zanzibari ACT Wazalendo candidate was also suspended for a week, and that they could not compete evenly by accessing people. And also this is also raising tensions. And the last 2 points that I would like to make in terms of the rising tensions and shrinking democratic space. One, that you have a situation where it's not only application of laws that are directly related to the electoral process, but the use or misuse of security laws, counterterrorism laws, laws that have to do with registration and operations of civil societies and religious organizations. Those ones are now an instrument that is used to shrink further any remaining democratic space. And we would like them to at least allow for a competitive process that allows for meaningful and full participation of citizens. Then the other issue that is, I think, very, very important is that we have reached a stage where now there is also contention concerning agents of political parties and presidential candidates and other candidates. And there is an increasing impediment of opposition agents from being credited or accredited to various polling stations. The regulations in Tanzania require that an agent has to swear an oath, and this process of acceding to an affidavit has to be done before an electoral officer. And they are receiving a lot of impediments to do that. And in the absence of full accreditation, they will not have the right to observe the polls. This will have a further effect of undermining the credibility of these elections. Lastly, I think, is to connect what Dr. Matembe was talking in terms of violence and possibility of violence with the shrinking democratic space and the role of the security agencies combined. We are prayerful and hopefully that our brothers and sisters in Tanzania will have an improvement of otherwise a context that does not allow for equal opportunity to compete, that the remaining days, state agencies and officials can do a lot of things to improve. And we are hoping that the elections day in a week's time would be done smoothly, credibly, and that people will be allowed to observe. And this is the last point I want to make. There has been restrictions concerning the ability of independent observer missions to carry out their work in Tanzania, including the disqualification of very credible institutions like the Catholic Church, which has always had an opportunity to observe elections in Tanzania, but they have been denied an opportunity to observe elections. Civil society organization, human rights defenders, human rights organization, those who are seen to be independent, have been denied the opportunity to observe these elections. And concerning our work, we are saying, even at this late hour, it is possible to improve the administration of these elections, and that we are hopeful that the outcome will reflect the will of the people. But we are very concerned that the conditions that exist and has existed in the lead up to the elections have not been such that they allowed full participation of all the actors, political and civic as well. Thank you very much, Teresa.
Thank you. Thank you, Zain. That was quite the observation, and I think a sad day for Africa and Tanzania specifically in terms of civic space and the situation in Tanzania as far as freedom of information and expression is concerned. Let's bring in Don Dare. Don Dare is the executive director of the Pan-African Lawyers Union. Don, you have experience in civic space. You've observed elections elsewhere in the region. You have come across violence and what violence can do to a country in terms of the state peaceful elections, which is the goal we seek in terms of elections. In your opinion, and seeing what is happening in Tanzania and what Zain has so ably illuminated to us as the observation of the TEW, what dangers is Tanzania facing when it shrinks civic space, arrests journalists, and sort of the things that it's doing to bar campaigns, etc., while it is using security forces to carry out violence in the country? What dangers is it facing in your experience, even in observing other elections in the region?
Thank you very much, Teresa. And I'd just like to say also thank you very much to the co-chairpersons and the members of the panel, the eminent panel of Tanzania Elections Watch, for the work that you have elected and volunteered to do on behalf of Africa with respect to this beloved sister country, Tanzania. That, I think, is a true manifestation of the spirit of Pan-Africanism, that we care for the lives of persons of African descent, wherever they may be, anywhere in the world, and that we need no invitation to express solidarity with each other and to wish the best for the whole of Africa. Teresa, to answer your question briefly, when we shut down political space and when we shut down civic space, in countries, and we have seen this all across Africa, it leads to a delegitimization of those that govern us. They lose the legitimacy and the credibility to govern us. We've seen breakdown of society. We've seen violence, especially the young women and men, when they feel constrained and unable to speak, they will take to the stone, the stick, the gun. And we have to be very worried in Africa now, as in the rest of the world, because our young people are not only getting guns now, they are also using drones. We've been seeing drones being used in the terrorist violence, the deplorable terrorist violence in northern Mozambique, in Cabo Delgado province. And it will be very hard, as we've seen in Somalia, in Libya, in Mali, and so on, to recover once we've let institutions for the rule of law break down or lose legitimacy, and the people resort to self-help. And I'd like to say that, as you know, for PALU, we work on independence of the legal profession, we work on independence of the judiciary, we work on protection and promotion of human and people's rights all across the continent. And we do have a focus on civic space. guaranteeing the right of every woman and man, girl and boy to be able to access information, to be able to express themselves, to be able to assemble and associate as they choose within the law. And to just regret that part of what we've seen in Tanzania is a misuse of the law. A misuse of the law to completely constrain the space for civic action, for political action. And that very early in the fifth phase administration, way back in 2016, the government moved to remove the live coverage of parliament, not only by the public broadcaster, but even by private broadcasters who are willing to broadcast parliament live at their own cost. And immediately thereafter, we saw then parliament being used in a rush to enact a raft of laws, mostly under certificate of urgency, which is a tool that parliament should use very rarely. But this certificate of urgency is being used willy-nilly, even for miscellaneous amendments laws. And we've seen now laws being amended, media laws, NGO laws, political parties laws, local government laws, cybersecurity laws, financial intelligence regulations, online content regulations, statistic laws, and so on, regulations, which have really constrained the space. And our own Tanzanian colleagues have spent a lot of time documenting this, commenting on this, criticizing this, and calling for action. If you look at the annual reports of the Tanganyika Law Society, of the Tanzania Human Rights Defenders Coalition, of the Legal and Human Rights Center, if you look at comments being made by veteran journalists and public commentators like Generali Ulimwengu, like Elsie Eyakuze, and so on, and if you also look at statements by UN Special Rapporteurs, such as the UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights Defenders, the UN Special Rapporteur on freedom of expression, the UN Special Rapporteur on freedoms of peaceful assembly and association, you see this has already been captured. So we're really pleading with the government and the people, and especially the government, to please move back and revise these laws so that they're in tandem with commitments you have made under your own constitution, under the Treaty of the East African Community, under the Treaty of SADC, the Southern African Development Community, under the pact and the protocols of the International Conference of the Great Lakes region, and also under AU law, especially the Constitutive Act of the AU, the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, all of which Tanzania, just like the other East African Community partner states, are signatories to and are therefore bound by. Thank you, Teresa.
Right. Thank you very much, Don, and thank you for bringing us back to international and regional commitments, because this is where I think when we're discussing Tanzania, and as Zain and yourself rightly point out, is some of these laws, and I believe that is part of the observation of the TEW, is that some of these laws are not in keeping with international and regional commitments, which is something that you've brought out quite clearly. So thank you, Don. We'll now head over to Professor Sempembwa, the chair of the TEW. And Prof, you have heard what the rest of the members of the panel have said and the speakers. And when we think about all these human rights violations, all this violence happening, what comes to our mind is what are the institutions that have been put in place to ensure that we have free, fair, credible elections, but also an environment that enables that kind of elections. And those that come to mind are the Election Commission itself. What comes to mind is the Human Rights Commission. What comes to mind is the judiciary. And so therefore the independence of these institutions and the fairness in these institutions must be called to question. So it would be interesting to hear from you in terms of the panel, what have been the observations in terms of independence and also in terms of the ability of these institutions to deliver a free, fair and credible election. Over to you, Prof.
Thank you very much. The last 2 or 3 speakers, of course, have said it all and have very little to add. I would say that elections, the credibility of elections is dictated by the entire, the context in which the entire electoral season proceeds. And this electoral season begins with the end of an election and the end of a subsequent election. The conditions that will bring about credibility, of course, are conditions of good governance, in which there is democracy, respect for the rule of law and human rights, transparency and accountability. It's only in this context that the institutions involved in organizing elections, providing the capacities for elections to be held, that can sit independently and review the previous election, the problems that were met, and find solutions. But if these conditions of good governance do not persist, then the whole context becomes one in which the various institutions either proceed on their own or are captured. Here we can look at the major institutions to begin with, which is the executive, parliament, and the judiciary as organs of state. With this lack of democracy, it's now possible for this executive to capture the legislature so that it's no longer able to perform its traditional role, not only legislative, but oversight over the other institutions. And therefore, as the previous speakers have mentioned, it's been possible for the legislature to come out with laws that really are geared not to solving the problems that arose in past elections, but to maintain the status quo, the regime in power. The judiciary is also very important because in the process of deciding electoral disputes, they will be able to make recommendations as to what the situation should be for the next elections. But when they are also not proceeding in under conditions of independence, when they have been captured by the state, the appointment process is not subjected to any checks and balances, then you don't expect this institution to act independently and come out with proposals. So the situation, as we have observed, is that the institutions managing elections, especially electoral commissions, we talk about the institutions for human rights, the political parties regulators, and the political parties themselves, and the local governments in a system of devolution, which should be the ideal for any country, including Tanzania. So you find that the problems of the past arising from the fact that the laws as they were conceived would not provide for real independence of these institutions. This cannot be changed. For example, if you go for appointments of the electoral commissions, there are no control. It's okay if the president appoints, but it's ideal for the appointment process to be subjected to controls, either through the nomination process or through an approval process, so that it is transparent and democratic. But when you look at these institutions, all the appointments are within the absolute discretion of the executive, the president in this situation. And hence, what we have seen is that these institutions do not act independently. The legislature, to go back to the legislature, has been persuaded, as Donde has said, to pass laws that are retrogressive. If you look at the laws governing political parties, they've given the leadership of the registrar of political parties powers that are not proportionate to any imaginable problem, except that they are meant to stifle the activities of political parties. Also the powers given to the Electoral Commission, the same thing can be said. So what we have is a situation where I think a strong recommendation would be that throughout the entire electoral season, conditions of democracy or good governance persist. If they don't, then we shall have this situation where the executive captures all the institutions, including the institutions of democracy, and we cannot expect any free and fair elections. We shall, of course, be making recommendations towards what we think should be a free and fair elections. We note, of course, that in this case, there will be no credible election observers. It's not to say that an election becomes credible because of the positive comments of the observers. In most cases, the observers have not had a chance to review the whole elections, what has gone on during the election season. They only have a chance to observe the voting process. And so the value of their reports is decreased. But all the same, we think that what has been done in the various measures by the executive and the legislature needs to be subjected to a second look, at least for purposes of the next election. I think questions would arise, what can we do for this election? I think it is important, what we are doing is important to tell the whole world, to tell our brothers and sisters in Tanzania that we do not think that the ongoing election is free and fair. And it will not even be free and fair even if the opposition wins. It might win against all odds. So the winning of the opposition does not make it free and fair. Neither does the condemnation by the opposition make the election to be unfree or unfair. So what I've said is that we need conditions of good governance throughout the electoral season. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Prof. And we'll come back in just a bit. I just want to honor a few of the people who are commenting on our section, and just to announce that we are one speaker away from the question and answer session. So keep those questions coming. Thank you for those who are streaming on our Twitter handle at Tanzania Watch. Thank you for those who are streaming in on our Instagram at Tanzania Watch. Thank you so much. Thank you, Anna Kulaya from Wildaf in Tanzania. Thank you for watching us. Thank you, Musa for the comment that this is a very important meeting. We appreciate you. Thank you, Raj Sin. I hope I pronounced that right. Thank you, Ekai Nabenyo. I also hope I pronounced that right. We will come to your questions in just a bit, so hold on for just a moment. But important things that you bring in, Prof, in your discussion, and I just want to rope in Brian into the discussion. Brian, Prof just declared doom, so to say. But then you have this country that has the kind of laws that Dawn has talked about, that then declare that you cannot challenge presidential elections to begin with. You have barely any electoral jurisprudence coming from the courts. You have an election commission whose commissioners are appointed by the president. And so are all these other oversight institutions that Prof has talked about. The other speakers just talked about the violence that is being perpetrated by the police. And from where I stand, which I believe is where a lot of Tanzanians stand today, is saying, but all these things seem to be puppeteered by just one person or one office, which is quite sad. Is there hope for Tanzania during this election? Prof just said recommendations to make these laws and amend the appointment of these people going forward for the next election. But for this election, and with the experience that you have sitting in a commission, having worked on judicial independence for quite a long time, is there hope for Tanzania? And what kind of elections are we looking at, Brian?
Oh, certainly. When you sit in from where I'm sitting and just listen to the panelists that have come before me, you are left wondering whether there is hope, and that reminded me as I was listening to, I think, Dr. Matembe, that a statement that was made by a former U.S. ambassador to Zimbabwe, which I think speaks to a lot of the institutions that we have on the continent, not just when it comes to elections, but generally. His name was Christopher Dell. He said that in Zimbabwe, you find that there are a lot of committees and very little commitment. And that to me just spoke of the window dressing, or the semblance of democracy, or the semblance of institutionality that we have in a lot of the institutions that we have here in Zimbabwe. But I can say similarly for everywhere else that I've had the privilege to sit and watch electoral processes, that we have a semblance of constitutionality. We have a semblance of doing things by the book, but we don't actually take that a step further. And when you're looking at a topic as important as elections, I think very often as we sit in spaces like this one and we look at things from an intellectual perspective, we forget that at the essence, or at the core of our democratic movements, or at the core of our democratic dispensations, is the need to have credible and fair elections. It's the only way that citizens, it's the most direct way that citizens get to participate in the governance of their countries. They get to participate in public affairs, and they get to engage with the processes in their country. And when you take that away from them, you disenfranchise your population and you exclude them from their governance. And when you're looking at election management bodies that are set up, the job, the role that they play is just as essential as the role that is played by the tax collector, that is played by law and order institutions in the country. They play a very critical role ensuring that our countries continue to move. That is why it is important that we continue to speak of their independence and their impartiality, to ensure that we continue to have processes on the continent that allow for the continent's citizens to participate. And the point that you raised around the appointment procedure, that's always a very contentious issue that a lot of people often discuss. Is the appointment process synonymous with independence? What exactly are we talking about when we're looking at independence of bodies of this nature? And we know that the electoral bodies take different shapes, different forms, and have different appointing authorities. But when we are talking about independence, it's not just about how you come into being or who sets you up, but it's essentially how you carry out your work and how you conduct yourselves as an institution. And it's not just about having the correct legislative framework or the correct constitutional framework, but actually how it works out in practical terms. And for me, listening to a prof who came before me, it sounds to me that we don't have that fundamental element, that grounding that you need for the electoral management body in Tanzania, that essential element of independence to ensure that we have a fair and credible election in the country. And that is important. And I list 3 reasons why it is important for them to sit as an independent commission, particularly in the context that we find ourselves in. And I agree with Prof and I agree with previous speakers that when you're looking at elections, you're not just looking at what is happening on election day, but you're looking at the entire process. And if already before we get to the 28th of October, we're already having such strong views being expressed about the process being flawed, even if, as Prof pointed out, we get the opposition, for example, winning, we have already excluded the population. We've already excluded the people of Tanzania from effectively participating in the electoral process. And I say that my brief was really to look at why independence is important. And I sit on an independent commission myself. So this is something that I really think that is important, and I really hope I'll be able to share the essence of what I want to say. So I list 3 reasons why, for me, the electoral management body has to be independent. The first one is that we need genuine periodic elections. That in itself is important. We need to ensure that the people of Tanzania have an opportunity to elect the right representatives for themselves and ensure that they hold the current government to task, and they are able to hold them to account for their tenure since the last set of elections. And we always look at the positive side, why this is important, but never look at the negative side. If they do not do a job that is credible, the first thing that is likely to happen is that we will have corruption. A government that is not legitimately in power does not value the opinions of the electorate. It does not value the people, and you find that you have more impunity, you have more oppression and repression being meted out to the people. The people are literally sidelined in processes like that. You find that your state institutions, when they do not function the way they should function, they cultivate a culture of impunity in the country. The second point is that you lose public confidence. And I think the point around protest has already been raised. Where people do not value or do not see the legitimacy of a government, they are likely to go to the streets. And we saw that here in Zimbabwe. I think you can relate to that from your experiences in Kenya, where the electoral process has not been legitimate, or is not seen by the general population as legitimate. You are likely to see a lot of protest. In Zimbabwe, we had a very violent protest that took place on the 31st following the elections in 2008, and that did not end well with the shooting of, I think, protesters, and at least 8 people that we know recorded dead. 6 months later, we had as many as 29 citizens who were shot and killed during protest policies. But also, you then don't get the citizens buy-in in government processes. Government then becomes an outsider. People do not value what government is doing and the contribution that government will be doing to their general welfare, because they don't trust the officials who are elected by election management bodies that are generally not seen as being independent, that are generally not seen as playing a part in the process. And so this then leads to my third point. You then get to see the involvement of the courts in election dispute resolution, which cannot happen in Tanzania, as you are aware of the legislative provisions that are in place now, which don't allow for disputes to be resolved, which means that the public will revert to protest, will revert to mass actions to ensure that their voice continues to be heard and their voice is articulated in the governance of their country. And yeah, so the question you ask is, what do I see? And for me, the outlook looks very bleak. It's unfortunate that we find ourselves in a situation where we are constantly creating institutions that are not serving the people. We're constantly creating institutions that are only serving a political elite on the continent, and we need to ensure that for the sake of the people of Tanzania, that we have a process that is legitimate and that is properly managed. I just had those few points to make at this stage. I understand I will have another opportunity at a later stage. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian, and thank you for giving us hope into the issues of Tanzania and saying it doesn't matter how commissioners and the rest of the people in these institutions have come into these offices. What really matters is their commitment and the way they carry out their job, and I think that's a clarion call to Tanzanians and those holding offices in Tanzania to ensure that they examine themselves and the mandates they have been given to ensure that then they deliver to Tanzanians a free, fair, and credible election that is actually reflective of the will of Tanzanian people. So ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the session that we're all excited about for the question and answer session. And I think I'll start with questions that have been posed towards the panel. And who else to answer these questions other than the chair of the TEW that is here with us today? Prof, there's a question from the panel, from the participants that are asking, what is our mandate? Why do we exist? What are the things we're hoping to achieve through our work? Maybe you can prepare to answer that question. To Zain, seated with me here. Zain, there are questions, two types of questions for you. One is, there are those who are asking, and I think I want to read out their name. If I can, we have Ekai, who's asking, he's a program officer from Digital Rights in East Africa at Paradigm Initiative, and he asks, what role can they play as civil society in the shrinking of civic space that you talked about? And what he's specifically worried about is the internet shutdown and rumors of internet shutdown in Tanzania as we draw near to elections. What can they do? What can the people of Tanzania do? And the other type of question for you, Zain, is with participants, quite a bit of them asking, what has been the reaction from the region, EAC, reaction from the UN, and what has the TEW done in terms of raising the issues of Tanzania to this panel? And I know you've been quite involved in some of the few advocacy things that we've done in the panel, and so perhaps you can respond to that. So we'll start with you, Prof. Then we can come to Zain, and then we'll pose more questions to Dr. Matembe. Prof?
Yes, I would say, in short, we've come together because of a situation where there is a virtual absence of sensitization of the people in Tanzania, the people in the region, and the people in the world generally, a virtual absence of sensitization as to what is going on, what is the context in which and the election is taking place. As panelists have said, the other, the organs that would have involved in this sensitization have been gagged. Civil society is literally inactive or silent. So that is one reason why we said we must watch these elections. The other, of course, is also the absence of oversight. One would have expected that organs like the judiciary, like the legislature, would provide from some sort of oversight of what is going on. Constitutionally, that is their mandate, but because of the situation in which has been commented upon by the panelists, which makes this oversight absent, we thought that we would feel that vogue and come and speak out. And hope that, so that is our mandate.
Thank you, Prof.
Okay.
Zane?
Thank you very much. Let's start with the first one. How do we ensure there is continuous, credible information flowing from Tanzania and affecting all Tanzanians? The first one is to request the Tanzanian authorities not to shut down the internet, not to shut down telephone, not to shut down means of communication. But the other one is to continue mobilizing all the world to pay attention next week of what is happening in Tanzania, so that illuminating a light in Tanzania becomes a way of ensuring that transparent, legal, constitutional actions that are designed to minimize violence, are designed to guarantee the civil liberties and the human rights of citizens are respected. And we know that there are outlets that have means that are outside state control, for example, satellite telephones. So I think it is important for those who have those means to keep us informed of what's going on in Tanzania and making sure that every action is open to scrutiny and is open to accountability. But in terms of who else are we engaging? We're engaging many of the international mechanisms from the African Union, the East African Community, SADC, but also the Tanzanian authorities. But we're also engaging the United Nations mechanisms and the Commonwealth. It is important for the people of Tanzania to know that their brothers and sisters are burning the midnight oil to ensure that the whole world is watching what is happening in Tanzania. And this watching is also a means of accountability. And we are also collecting data and evidence of every violation or allegation of a violation that is taken. And that the relevant mechanisms for accountability worldwide, those who can engage with them, please engage them. But more importantly, engage with the Tanzanian authorities and the president, his government, and all state institutions, and remind them of their commitments that they have made to themselves through their constitution, their legal infrastructure, but as Don said, to international mechanisms and institutions of which Tanzania is party to, including the United Nations, but more importantly, the African Union. And you know that the African Union has been robust. We know that the East African Community has constituted an observer mission. And we hope that mission will start first by looking at their own recommendations that they made in 2015, and see how many of those recommendations have been acted on, or there has been reversals. And we hope and pray the mission will be brave, honest, and say things the way they are. And all the well-meaning Africans and people who love peace and human rights and democracy should keep an eye on what is going on in Tanzania. That's the best we can do. For the next coming 2-3 weeks, we will be watching very closely about what's going on in Tanzania. I hope this answers these two questions.
Thank you, Zain. And I hope, Gasto Gomoka, your question has also been answered by Zain, because you then asked about the African Union. We have Ferdinandi John, who then asks to you, Dr. Matembe. He asks about the situation of the police in Tanzania and the violence that they're causing. He's also concerned about the favorism that he observes in terms of the National Election Commission, in terms of their mandate. And he asks what can be done about it to control or to then deal with this situation. As you plan to answer that, we will also have a question for Brian. There's a question that asks where we're watching from, and I think that is from various countries around the region. We have representation from SADC, we have representation from Kenya and from Uganda. But the question also that you can help us answer, Brian, is why is it important for African countries? Somebody says all the African countries are tainted in terms of independence and in terms of delivering a free and fair and credible election. So why is it important for people in Africa who are from countries that are not perfect to observe elections in Tanzania? Maybe you can help us answer that, Brian. But first, Dr. Matembe.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to hear those questions, especially the last question, because of course it points to people like us who are going through such situations. But what I want to say before I answer the other question, I would like to add on what Professor Sempevo has said. Yes, we are colleagues here from Eastern and Central Africa, very concerned about Tanzania. Why? Tanzania is our neighbors. In fact, according even to the law of God, we are supposed to love our neighbors as we love ourselves. And so we come in as driven by love and care for our neighbors to see that it doesn't deteriorate into situations which some of us have experienced. Very much knowing the role Tanzania has played in the liberation of Africa, it has been a beacon of hope and a point of reference for some of us. I mean, Professor and I and the team, some of the members come from Uganda, where we know that Tanzania played a big role in liberating us from Amin. I mean, they paid a lot to make sure that we come back to the right place of peace and security when we are going through murder and that kind of situation. Therefore, we have experience in how things go bad. And when we see such a country that has been a beacon of hope going towards where we have been and suffered, we certainly get interested and would like to see it not go that bad. That's why we are concerned. So the fact that also we have problems in our countries, if you have a problem and like for instance of domestic violence in your home and you see a neighbor beating his wife, I don't think if you say no, please stop that, it would be wrong because you would be helping a neighbor. Now, having said that, I would like to, about police, the question was, what can we do about police, which is doing what it is doing? Actually, to answer both questions about the lack of independence of electoral commission, that's the very reason why we are on this team trying to raise up these issues, because we ourselves cannot do anything, but we are so concerned that when police does what it does, promoting violence, I mean, cramping people, doing what it is doing, threatening people, and we feel so bad, and we say, look, you know, Tanzania is a country which does its things privately and quietly. And we don't want our neighbors and friends to die and suffer quietly. We said, let's bring it out onto the public scene. Let us debate these matters and critically debate them, hoping that actually Tanzania, I mean, President Magufuli should remember that when he was elected, you should remember the fury with which he was welcomed on board. Does he want to be seen as the president that has killed the legacy of Tanzania, the legacy of Mwalimu Nyerere? Does he want to be the one to be remembered in history as the one who brought Tanzania down to dictatorial regimes and suffering of its people? So we talk. We call upon the international community and everybody concerned to talk, and we believe that they can hear and see what to do. Otherwise, for us as a team, ours is to talk and call upon them to really exercise restraint and ensure that, for instance, the Electoral Commission should play its independent role, and the police should really make sure that there is no violence, there is equal treatment of the people. It should play its role of protecting people rather than violating them, and keep security during elections, but not beating people and torturing them the way they're doing. We are hoping that they will hear anyway. And who knows, God may change their minds.
Right. Thank you, Dr. Matembe. Brian.
Well, thank you, Teresa. As you would know, that my interaction with electoral processes has mostly been on the tail end, when upstream processes have failed, and matters are brought before the courts. That's my particular niche when it comes to this conversation. But that's not the case as we are looking at Tanzania. The citizens do not have that as a fallback. They don't have the luxury that most countries would have to take up electoral challenges, to put the whole process to task. So what that then means is that all of us who are interested in democracy on the continent must then be more vigilant. We must then be more aware and more alive to the challenges that confront the people of Tanzania as they go into this electoral process. And we must keep our eyes open to ensure as much as we can that the process is credible, the process is fair. I agree with Prof. Frederick that yes, things are not looking well at the moment. So that's why it is important that we keep our eyes on the ball and ensure that we continue to monitor and stand in solidarity with the people of Tanzania. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. We will now invite the members of the panel to perhaps give final recommendations. We have Honorata Swai, who then says, so therefore, what is the way forward? And I think it's a good question to sort of bring this conversation into a close. I'll begin with Zain sitting next to me, and we'll then go to Dr. Matembe, to Prof, and to Brian finally.
Thank you very much, Teresa. I think I will make only 3 points. The first one is that it is important for the authorities in Tanzania, even at this late hour, to uphold the rule of law and the democratic rights of citizens, and respects the rights of citizens, and guarantee a peaceful election. It is absolutely important for us to appeal to the authorities in Tanzania and say, still you can do many things that can improve the context of the elections as we come to the voting day, the counting process and the declaration of results and the aftermath. that the citizens' rights are guaranteed, peace is upheld, and that the security forces do not use violence against the people, and they even-handedly handle the political actors. Secondly, we will appeal to the opposition and all the other participants to the elections to do the same, to promote peace, to ensure that we can improve the conditions of the elections now. Unfortunately, as others have observed, there are no credible conflict resolution mechanisms of using courts if you have any disputes concerning, for example, the outcome of the presidential elections. Unlike other democratic jurisdictions, in Tanzania, you cannot go to court and ask for interventions of the judicial processes that you can challenge the outcome. So it is important to do that. But the third one is to all well-meaning global citizens of the world, the members of the African Union, the members of the East African Community, and the members of the Southern African Development Community, SADC, and the leadership to proactively engage with all the actors in Tanzania and say to them, it is absolutely critical for us to have credible and peaceful elections. Those two principles must go hand in hand. Credible, free, fair, and peaceful elections. If you have a challenge in one, chances are you will have a challenge in the other. So it is prayerful, and those who believe are people of faith, let's pray for Tanzania, because Tanzania is part and parcel of Africa, and extend our solidarity to the people of Tanzania and pray for them, but also keep an eye on what's going on. Thank you very much, Teresa.
Thank you, Zain. Dr. Matembe? Dr. Matembe, are you with us?
I was.
Yes. Go ahead.
I want to say that I'm very happy, at least today, that while we have been doing this work alone, today we have got so many people who have listened to what we have said, and to a big extent, we have actually achieved a step in the role for which we formed this election watch. I want to, first of all, appeal to the president and leadership of Tanzania to at least to remember the glorious role Tanzania has played for liberation of Africa from oppression and exploitation, and to remind them that they should not be the ones now to oppress, suppress, and exploit the people. They should not take the role of the colonizers whom they were fighting. At least I appeal to Magufuli and the government to be mindful of that. We don't want to regret that surely even Tanzania has passed this road, which is no good. And I would like to appeal to the security forces to know that their security forces, especially these police, they are maintained by these people, the finances that, the funds that sustain them, that maintain them, are the resources from the people of Tanzania, and their role is supposed to protect the people of Tanzania and not to torture them and harass them the way they are doing. And they need to know that, election is not a matter of life and death. I want to appeal to opposition, both government and opposition. Election is not a matter of life and death. There is no reason why election should be a matter of life and death, why it should result in people's death. It should not be. And so I want to appeal also to the people of Tanzania. Don't fear, because when you are so scared and you just keep quiet, you will suffer quietly, whether they are torturing you, whether they are, but don't violate the law, but don't fear. Come out and talk openly. If they arrest your colleague, other people should talk. But if you are just intimidated and encircled, and you'll be finished. So I want to thank all the people who have listened to us, and I want to ask them on their part also in their offices where they work to go and do like we are doing and make sure that we popularize the situation in Tanzania, so that who knows, when they hear all this, maybe there could be some change and things won't go as bad as they appear to be going right now.
Dr. Matembe, we cannot hear you.
Hey,
Sorry,
what
I
do
couldn't
we
hear
do?
what you said.
Maybe we'll come back to Dr. Matembe in just a few.
You have
Over to you.
No.
Over to you now, Brian.
I don't even. There was
Hello?
something.
Dr. Matembe, okay, we have you now. Please go ahead.
I really don't know how far I had gone.
You were thanking the participants for listening to us and asking them to stand and work from their offices and push.
Yes, also join us so we may push, so that in the end, you never know, we can rescue the situation so that things will not go so bad. And then I was also appealing to the people of Tanzania. They should not be so scared and encircled and fear, but let them, whatever they do, let them also do within the ambit of the law. They should not go violent, and because when they go violent and they go to demonstrate by force, they will die. Our young people will die, and we don't want to see a situation like it happened in Kenya when our thousands of youth died because of elections.
Thank you very much, Dr. Matembe. Professor?
Thank you. I'd like to add my voice to my co-panelists about the way forward. First of all, by appreciating the Tanzania leadership and all the other stakeholders, including political parties, for their commitment to ensure that the sovereignty of the people to choose who will be their leaders is maintained, at least for that commitment, despite all the shortcomings that have taken place. And in that vein also, to appeal, as my co-panelists have appealed, for Tanzanians to be aware of what is going on, but to participate in a peaceful manner, and also to make sure that at the voting, at least they observe and come out with criticisms, constructive criticisms and recommendations. I will also appeal to the observers that have been credited. Much as we have had issues with exclusion of other observers, appeal to these observers to partake their tasks with independence and in a transparent manner, and comment as to what has gone on throughout the election season, and report on its impact on the elections, whatever the outcome of those elections. Thank you very much to all people who have participated. We are very grateful.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Prof. To you, Brian, and then Don.
I really don't have much to add. Then just to encourage everyone who took part to keep a keen eye on proceedings that are taking place in Tanzania, to just stand in solidarity with everyone who's watching, and make sure that we have a positive story to tell from the processes that are taking place there, and that the narrative at the end will be one that we all able to live with, and are happy to say that things went well. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Don?
Thank you very much, Teresa. I think I noticed earlier, and I don't know if she's still there, that one of the participants in this webinar was Professor Yaya Saida Othman. And I'd just like to say a greeting to her and to remind the people of East Africa that in January of 2008, as Kenya was beginning to descend into crisis, the very first intervention that was made on Kenya was actually by Tanzanian academics and Tanzanian civil society. Mama Helen Kijo Bisimba, who was a veteran executive director of the Legal and Human Rights Center, convened a meeting of Tanzanian activists and CSOs in LHRC in Dar es Salaam. And at the same time, a couple of professors, including the late Professor Harb Othman, convened a kamukunji of university lecturers from all across different faculties at the University of Dar es Salaam. Both of them issued immediate statements of solidarity to Kenya, calling for calm, calling for peace, calling for good governance. And both of them made entreaties to the government of Tanzania, then led by His Excellency Jakaya Mrisho Kikwete. This was very influential in determining how Tanzania engaged with the unfolding situation in Kenya and how the AU engaged with the unfolding situation in Kenya. We as East Africans have been there for each other before, and we're being called upon to be there for each other now. None of our countries are perfect. All of them are a work in progress. And the fact that other countries have work that needs to be done does not mean that we ignore our colleagues from Tanzania at this crucial moment in the life of their nation. So we call for peace. I thank, because I'm not a member of the panel, but I'm a friend of the panel. I thank the panel for the initiative and the leadership they have shown. I just beseech them to continue engaging and to directly engage our heads of state in the region. As Brian Penduka said, it is not too late. It is not too late. We pray for peace in Tanzania, we pray for democracy in Tanzania, we pray for good governance in Tanzania. And we urge that the AU, the EAC, SADC, ICGLR continue being engaged from now to the election to after the election. Thank you very much, colleagues.
Thank you very much, Don, and thank you for ending in that way and saying it's not too late. So there is hope for Tanzania, if only they act on the recommendations, both given by the TEW, but also given by previous observer missions. We will now invite you, Prof, for the launch, which is a very critical part of the TEW webinar today. And just before you launch, perhaps answering a question that has been asked by Teule watching us. And Teule is wondering, if elections in Tanzania are not free and fair, is this TEW initiative ready to state as much? Whether you have the boldness to state as much. So as the chair of the commission, as the chair of the TEW, Prof, maybe you can answer that even as you usher in the TEW pre-election report. Over to you, Prof.
Thank you very much. Well, the TEW intends to be very objective in its work. It will not simply declare that the election is not free, is not fair. It has to issue, we intend to issue a reasoned report at the end, which will also incorporate some of the issues that are being highlighted in this pre-election report. In that report, there will be a full analysis of what has transpired. and in such a way that conclusions can be made. And there's no fear about our statements that we, in our observation, the election is not has not been conducted in a free and fair manner. A reasoned report. And now that you've given me the chance, today is the launch of the pre-election report. It contains greater details than what members of the panel have been able to discuss with you. It has a background of the situation since the last election, what has transpired, and the involvement of various stakeholders, and it highlights some of the developments that has been today. We invite you to read this report and give us feedback. We'll be glad to get that feedback and move forward as we proceed. I very welcome the statement that is not too late. I think that is a slogan now we should acquire. It is very encouraging that what we are doing is not too late. We hope that through this report, there will be some influence on all stakeholders, and all the participants in elections will be sensitized and act accordingly. So what do I say? That I have the honor to launch this report. I want guidance.
Yes, Prof. The election report is now on, and the participants can be able to see at least the cover of it. But please go ahead and launch it as you will.
Thank you very much. I now take the honor and the pleasure to launch the pre-election report by Tanzania Election Watch. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Prof. The pre-election report will be disseminated shortly on our social media platforms. And if any of you needs it emailed to you, kindly let us know. Also, you will find it on our website, www.tanzaniaelectionswatch.org. Find time to go there and see, including other ways that the panel has amplified the voices of Tanzania. I would like to honor at this moment, as we launch the report, I'd like to honor the rest of the members of the panel of TEW. We have Ms. Alice Mogwe, who is a co-chair at the TEW panel. We have Dr. Willie Mutunga, who's also co-chair at the panel. Other members of the panel are Honorable Dan Ogalo. We have Honorable Lady Justice Lydia Mugambe. We have Professor Frederick Juko. We have Ms. Betty Kaari Murungi. We have Ms. Alice Wairimo Nderito. We have Mr. David Makali. And we have Professor Chaloka Bayani. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, for giving your time and your expertise to the Tanzania Elections Watch panel to be able to give your time to observe and to raise your voice, as Dr. Matembe was talking about. We really thank you. And to end our discussion, we'd like to thank our participants. There are a whole 100+ of you. Thank you very much for being participative as you have been. Thank you for the questions and the comments. We apologize if we were not able to directly answer any of your questions, but please feel free to continue this conversation on our social media platforms and to subscribe and follow us on our Twitter. Our Twitter handle is @WatchTanzania. We're also on Instagram @WatchTanzania as well. And also go to our website, as I said before, www.tanzaniaelectionswatch.org. We would like to thank you for your time and staying with us, and we look forward to hearing your comments about the pre-election report. For the Secretariat and the team that has made this possible, we thank you, and we wish you a very nice evening, and God bless you. Thank you.